Hello keyboard friends, I am Simon and this is my review of the Cannonkeys Savage 65%. Quite an interesting keyboard. Now this is made by Upas of Cannonkeys and this is a relatively budget-oriented 65% that kind of surprised me. So let's get right into it. So this keyboard costs, or this round of keyboard costed 265 USD, and this was part of the Savage lineup. That includes multiple keyboards that are all relatively low price and will be run continuously through future rounds. It's a simple designed 7.5-degree angle seamed keyboard with a top burger mount, which just means you get O-rings in the box. And also, it comes with foam if you wish to tune your sonic profile. It supports a whole bunch of PCBs. It's got a whole bunch of layout options. And overall, if I had to say, I was very pleasantly surprised by this keyboard, and I like it quite a lot. We'll go through why, and we'll start with the external case. So one of the first things you will notice, if you have not noticed already, is that this top piece overhangs the bottom piece. Let's get up nice and close for you guys. Look at that. Don't mind my sweat, that wipes right off. So this is one piece with this nice little bevel here, and then this is the bottom piece. Quite unique. Now, what I had originally seen this in IC phase, I kind of dismissed it because I thought the design looked ugly in the renders. But now that I see it in person, it is incredibly classy. It is super well done. And I am a big fan of this design, honestly. Its front height is relatively low at about 20 millimeters, which is not bad at all, especially for a 65%. And it is quite light due to the fact that it has no weight, no internal or external weight. So this sits at around 1.4 kilos completely built, or about 1.3, 1.2 unbuilt. Not bad. I'm a big fan of this color, although, if you guys can see, there is some notable anodization banding. That is, let's get more in there, that is vertical lines inside of the anode. Now, this can be caused by a lot of things. This can be caused by the aluminum extrusion when the aluminum is melted and made into bars, or this can also happen during the anodization process. Now, I spoke to Upas about this, and he said that some units do suffer from banding depending on the color. However, at the price point of $265, this is actually spectacular. Most notably because this is on the bottom of the case. You're not going to be staring at the bottom of the case, bringing it up to your face like this all the time. So it's totally fine. And I really like the color. It's a very, very matte burgundy, which as a result means it shows my fingerprints almost instantly because I have very sweaty hands. However, again, not a deal breaker since you're not manhandling the back of your board at all times. One notable design decision that Upas decided to do was to make what I refer to as the YOLO USB port. And that is a USB port that is so large that the connector just barely exists in there. This was done for a very specific reason. Upas wanted to give this the possibility to work with as many existing 65% PCBs as possible. And I appreciate that. However, I appreciate a flush port much more. I ran into an issue multiple times where I will have the board on my desk like this, and I will try to plug it in via a cable. And first try, nope. Second try, nope. I'm wiggling it around. There we go. I got it on the third try. Kind of rough, but again, not a deal breaker if this is going to be your primary board and it's going to be plugged in at all times. I am okay with that. I'm a big fan of the bezels. I think this looks about 6 to 7 millimeters, maybe 6.5, and it looks like it's the same all the way around, which is quite nice to see, honestly. The corners are gently rounded. Oop, a little too far. There we go. The corners here are gently rounded, both on the top case and the bottom case, and it plays very well with this bevel right here, which I am a big fan of. It's a lot of very, very small stylistic case design decisions that I really appreciate about this board that I really didn't like when I saw it during the IC phase. However, now that I have the actual board in hand, I do have a couple of issues. Obviously, we talked about the banding, but that's not a deal breaker. We talked about the USB port. That's not a deal breaker. What was incredibly annoying is I attempted to disassemble this PCB. Disassemble this case. And quite easy. I grabbed my screwdriver. This is a small screwdriver with, relatively small tip. And I am able to unscrew this screw totally fine. However, when I try and unscrew this one, my screwdriver doesn't fit in the hole. It's too big. Also, as a result, it also means I can't even tell if it's screwed all the way in. Can you guys tell? Let's get in there. I mean, this is huge. This is like 40 times actual size now? You can barely see that there's a screw in there. So I had an issue while assembling the board where I forgot, where I had one of these 3 screws fall out because I didn't screw it in. I couldn't figure out which one it was because you literally cannot see inside the hole because it is so small. So I was unable to disassemble it with this. Luckily, my friend Paul managed to come over and bring me a super thin-headed screwdriver compared to my usual one, which then allowed me to finally disassemble the case. Realistically, again, this is not a deal breaker. You just, need a very thin screwdriver and you're good to go. The price point of this board gives us a lot of leniency when it comes to any potential issues we may have with the board. Because realistically, at this price point, you're not getting any other decent 65%. So let's go ahead and disassemble this fully, and then look at the case internals and the PCB. Okie dokie. So let's take the PCB and plate and just put them aside for a second and focus on the case internals. Now you may have noticed that as I disassembled it, I pulled out this, which is a piece of shelf liner. Now this originally came with another type of sound dampener, though the client for which I'm building this board for some reason has shelf liner in it. We'll talk about the acoustics in a little bit, but now let's focus just on the case. Case bottom is relatively simple, screwing together with 4 screws, which is quite interesting because the plate screws together with 8 screws. The bottom is a simple wedge which accounts for the creation of the angle. Here is the bottom part of the USB cutout, which then means that the top case completes the full USB cutout. And then here, we have landing areas for alignment pillars, which is a huge, huge thumbs up for a board at this price point. I mean, $500 boards don't have this, and it is really handy when you're putting together a keyboard, so you don't have to fiddle around with it to just get the perfect alignment between the top and bottom. This allows you to just simply slap it on blindly, and it's aligned. You're not going to get any of that crookedness. There's a tiny little bit of play, but once you put the screws in, there is zero play, which is the way that alignment pillars should be. Aside from this, the case bottom is incredibly simple. There's no internal weights. There is no complex machining. There's a little bit of machining here on the USB cutout to give it a tiny bit more leeway for connectors that may potentially sit lower. I mean, this looks like maybe 1 millimeter. Besides that, the internals look fine. It's a little bit dirty, but again, this is the inside of the case. Doesn't really matter. There are no hook marks on the bottom piece, which then means that they hooked completely through it when they hung it for the anodization process. I'm a big fan of this engraved weight. I am a big fan of engraving in general. It's just deep enough to see, but it's also shallow enough as to not break the simplicity of the board. Overall, it plays very nice. Now for the top piece. The top piece obviously overhangs the bottom, and here's the nice little edges. So this allows you to basically have a seamed keyboard, but not have to do the anodization matching that is required for matching a top and bottom. So it gives you the freedom to kind of go seamless, where you can have a slight mismatch between the top and bottom because the top and bottom don't sit absolutely flush. Technically they do, but the top overhangs the bottom. And I like this, especially for a board at this price point. I love that design decision. It means that you can have a slight variance in anodization and the customer will never notice or care because it doesn't matter towards the overall design. All right. Right here, right off the bat, we can see some hook marks. Those are internal hook marks caused during the anodization process. Nothing strange going on there. You find these in way more expensive boards. And here we have the 4 little alignment pillars. Very simple, but they get the job done. And then we see the screw points through which the top case mounts to the bottom. Now, if we look very closely at the plate mounting points, we can see that around the screw area, there is a machined little area for the O-rings. Now, this is burger mount, so there would be an O-ring here between the top case and the plate, and then another O-ring before you get the screw in. My unit, again, this was a commission build that was sent to me by the owner. He didn't include the O-rings, and honestly, I kind of like it as a standard top mount. Besides this, nothing fancy going on. We've got the usual 65% blocker, and that's it for the top. Now, in terms of the foam that was put in here, I personally enjoyed the sonic profile without the foam, though the client whose build this is wanted the foam, so I did put the foam in. It helped a little bit with reducing a teeny bit of echo. Upa said he included the original dampener because people had complained that it sounded very hollow. Though without the foam, it did not sound hollow to me. The amount of reverberation that was actually there was perfectly normal for a keyboard. Not all keyboards should sound like a lead brick. There should be a little bit of sound moving around inside of the keyboard. Let's look at the plate next. Now, this is obviously built, and we want to get a good look at the plate. Thankfully, we have another plate right here. This is an FR4, so that is the PCB material that's used for PCBs. FR4 plate with a nice little white solder mask on it. It looks very good in person, and it's a standard 1.5 millimeter, nothing fancy, with some interesting cutouts for the logos, and then some acoustic cutouts around the keys that most need it. It has a decent amount of flex, and in my opinion, feels quite nice to type on. I mean, if you've typed on FR4, you know what it feels like. The nice thing about FR4 is in larger quantities, it ends up being cheaper than aluminum or brass or carbon fiber or potentially polycarbonate, but that kind of depends. This helps bring the price point down, but is not a downgrade in any sense. The FR4 plate plays very nicely with the feel and the sound of this particular keyboard. Now, this is a fixed plate, so this is a 7U spacebar and a standard 7U bottom row with a 1U Windows key. However, the build that I have here has a 6.25U spacebar. Excuse me. So fixed plate options I like quite a lot. Fixed plate options help with making sure that all of your switches, once put into their respective slots, stay perfectly straight, which is very, very important. I mean, I've got $1,000 builds in the cabinet behind me with crooked switches because the plate's tolerances were not done as well as this. As a result, we can take a look at this built PCB and plate and look at that. Everything is perfectly straight. It's spectacular. It works just like it should. All right, finally, we'll take a look at the PCB before we dive into the sound test. Now, the PCB is quite nice. Now, this PCB is going to look a little dirty. This has been rebuilt 3 or 4 times. So there's a lot of flux all over the place. It's probably not going to play nice with my big old light, but we're going to take a look at everything we can. We can see the traces heading down to the MCU here. This is an STM32. Pretty nice MCU. You've got a hardware reset switch, and you've got this mysterious switch, which I should have probably asked what it does, but I'm not going to touch it. The traces are clean. The finishing is clean. The surface mount components, the diodes and resistors and all of that, all of them are solid, didn't have anything pop off. This PCB is VIA and QMK compatible. And having VIA is super, super handy for somebody's, entry board to the market. It is quite well done and allows for in-switch LEDs. Pretty cool. I don't know of anybody that still builds with those, but quite nice to have. My one issue with the PCB is I would like to see, hopefully in a future generation or something like that, some markings about which switch is which. It helps newbies quite a lot, in considering that this is targeted towards a more budget-oriented, more new to the hobby kind of buyer. It would be nice to, for example, mark this is the normal caps, this is the stepped caps, for example, and then this is 6.25U bottom row, and then offset is the 7U bottom row, and mark the space bars. I mean, there's already printing being done for the diode and component names, as well as the brand logo. So I don't think it would cost too much more to just mark a few necessary keys just to help out those that may need it. I mean, I've built hundreds of boards and unbuilt hundreds of boards, and I swear to God, I still mess up the step caps lock 50% of the time, unless it's marked. When it's marked, it is so handy. Besides this, we can see that we've got a RGB header here. Very cool. I did not expect that at all. I do not see any pins for troubleshooting, but again, somebody that's buying a PCB like this or a kit like this isn't going to be troubleshooting their own PCB. And if push comes to shove, and for whatever reason something happens to your PCB, you've got the ability to use almost any 65% PCB with a left-oriented USB-C that you want. Also, I neglected to mention that it is USB-C. We live in 2020, and USB-C should be the norm. Therefore, I will not mention it going forward with any keyboard unless it does not have USB-C. Now, overall, let's talk sonic profile before we assemble this real quick and do a sound test. I like the feel, and I like the sound quite a lot. As I said before, I think it sounds totally fine without the burger mount and without any sound dampening. I don't think it sounds hollow. As a matter of fact, the amount of empty space in the bottom case is not much. This is about 4 millimeters deep, and accounting for the PCB and switch pins, which will account for about 3 millimeters, that only leaves about 1.5 millimeters, maybe 2 of free space. And that's not nearly enough room to make an echoey or hollow sounding keyboard. I liked it completely stock, simple top mount. It felt good and it sounded good. But I'll let you guys listen to what the final version, so with the dampening foam, sounds like. So, what do we think? Well, I'll tell you what I think about this lovely little keyboard. This thing shocked me. I have never been so pleasantly surprised with a keyboard in my life. For 265 bucks. A nice sounding, nice feeling, well built, well quality controlled 65% is spectacular. Now, obviously, this doesn't have the hype features like gasket mount and all that nonsense, but it sounds good and it feels good and it's cheap, which is great. Obviously, I do have some issues with the board, but they are expected at this price point. Notably, anodization banding, which again was an issue with some units since different runs were made with different factories, and UPAS is still trying to figure out how to essentially get this board out there more easily. Now, future runs, this is information that I got from UPAS, future runs will be a teeny bit more expensive to allow for better packing and security while transporting. When I say a teeny bit, I mean like $5 or $10, which is great. And most importantly, there are more runs planned. So if you're looking at a 65% and You don't want to go out and spend $450 or $550 or God forbid $600. You can get a great keyboard for under $300. Now, what would I like to see? There's a few things I'd like to see revised in the current version. Now, I fully understand why the USB cutout is the size that it is, obviously to allow for better compatibility. However, I would like to see slightly larger screw holes on the back so people don't have to buy new screwdrivers and people can tell whether or not their screws are actually in there or not. Now, what I would like, in addition to these slight revisions in the current run, is potentially a slightly more premium run. Something with a flush USB hole. Something with a slightly better source aluminum and slightly better anodization to remove the banding issue. If this can be done with a markup of like 50 to 70 US dollars, I think this is going to become a killer keyboard. Obviously, the design is not for everyone, and photos and videos do not do it justice. Having this thing in the hand just feels great. Like I'm holding it by the top case right now, and I am a big fan. I give this board a must-buy score with a 100% Simone seal of approval. You guys heard the sound test. Keep in mind that the sound test obviously was done with blueberries, which are a weird sounding switch and also a tactile switch that is relatively scratchy. However, this is going to sound a lot better if you put in more dampened switches, if you put in standard linear switches. As long as you do a decent loop job, the FR4 plate sounds fine. And if you have any issues with the sound, you have the option of throwing on the O-rings for the burger mount. You can do the top ones and the bottom ones. And in addition to that, if for whatever reason it sounds a little too hollow for you, which it shouldn't, you have the dampening foam that is included with the board. I think that as a package and in terms of the value proposition of this board, this thing blows any other budget 65% out of the water, 100%. So that's it. Wait and buy it. If you're interested in the 65, wait for the next run of the Savage. Get yourself a Savage. And if you're interested in other form factors, Cannonkeys is also doing other form factors at a lower cost. So about on par with, $265 to $275, maybe $280 for a 65. And then that scales depending on the size of the board that you want. Again, solid keyboard, love it a whole lot. And if you love Simone a whole lot, go ahead and drop a sub if you like keyboard content. Give this video a like if you like this video. If you hate this video, give it a dislike and write an angry comment and tell me terrible things. But that's it for my review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.